From The Times and The Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Luke Jones.
People need work, and people need jobs, and that's what makes our country great, and I think Trump's going to make our country great again.
We are all about supporting unity in this country. We love our country. We want people to be able to afford things, live well, have home ownership, be able to protect themselves, and live and let live.
Prosperity and greatness and restoring our country to its values should be unifying, and I believe he can do that.
Today is the final day of the Republican National Convention, where, you guessed it,
let's make it official. The chair announces that President Donald J. Trump, having received a majority of the votes entitled to be cast at the convention, has been selected as the Republican Party nominee for President of the United States.
The word unity is getting a lot of mention, a lot by the standards of a party whose candidate for president calls his opponent a criminal. But this isn't a normal Church of Donald Trump gathering, though. The RNC opened just 2 days after Trump's assassination attempt.
It's a curious juxtaposition of a circus with balloons waiting for the elephants to turn up inside the event, and outside military-looking vehicles and endless numbers of heavily armed police on guard, on alert for the threat from outside.
We'll take you there, and we'll hear of the man Trump has decided to run with, his vice presidential nominee, JD Vance.
If you're feeling confident, and if you're feeling powerful, which I think Trump is at the moment, then JD Vance is an ideological choice.
The story today. Trump survived. Is he now unbeatable?
I'm John Pienaar, and I am the presenter at Times Radio Drive, and I'm here in Milwaukee at the Republican National Convention, which is, I know, one of the biggest jamborees you're ever likely to see.
And you say jamboree, John. What is it actually like to look at? I'm picturing a kind of UK party conference, but then also something a bit like the Idle Home exhibition as well.
Right now, I'm sitting in a corner of a big building block devoted largely to the media, and there's some committee rooms around me, but it's part of a complex at the RNC, which stretches, it seems, over several city blocks. There are markets here selling Donald Trump merchandise, as well as, just about every fast food you can imagine, and some fast food you can't possibly imagine. Then you've got the big block, which is a basketball arena, which is normally the home of the Milwaukee Bucks. It seats many thousands of people. And when I say jamboree, that does not do justice to it. This is like a circus. I mean that almost literally. All that's missing are elephants. And since the symbol of the GOP are elephants, I will not be even remotely surprised if a long troop of elephants marches past me at any moment wearing red mega caps on their heads and hooting God Save America through their trumps. There are, I don't know how many thousands of balloons hanging overhead, suspended from nets. They're going to be dropping at the appropriate point when this thing comes to its climax.
And when you talk about the people who are there, are they besuited-looking officials and Washington types, or are they, as you say, that sort of red baseball cap, plaid shirt, Donald Trump-looking supporter? What do the people look like?
All those kind of people and more. There are people who you would almost describe as being in fancy dress with sort of cowboy, what look to me like cowboy outfits, with Stetsons on their heads and cowboys' waistcoats and cowboy boots. And of course, the ever-present red Make America Great Again baseball caps, and others, paying tribute to Donald Trump in this or that particular way. It has been a spectacle. It has been a spectacle with a purpose. There's a reason for having these conventions. They're the rallying of the faithful. They are where the party chooses and formally nominates their pick of candidate for president and that candidate's pick of vice presidential running mate, all of them duly nominated and enthroned by the party faithful, and the rest of it is about setting out the platform, setting out the message, and laying that sort of launching pad for the rest of the general election campaign. And what seems to be, from all I can see here, unique about this event is the devotional sense of it all. It is like a spiritual gathering. You know, at the weekend we saw Donald Trump just avoid that bullet by a fraction of an inch, it seems. And since then, you hear again and again and again the sentiment that Donald Trump was spared death by the hand of God, and it's now his destiny, in the literal sense of the word, to go on to take power in the White House.
I agree. I think God's dome of protection is definitely over him. We're Christian, and we definitely believe in that. And I think that, you know, the evil forces, no matter how hard they try, they're going to fail because God has a purpose for Trump, and I think he's going to achieve it, and he's going to protect him until that purpose is complete.
And as you've been going around, John, speaking to people, what has the mood been? What have people been saying to you?
Well, the mood, the tone, the content of what people have been saying to me, and it seems to each other and in the convention hall, has been one of pure devotion. I mean, these people, his most devout followers, they don't just support Donald Trump, they absolutely love him.
Way about Donald Trump. We think he's the best president that ever lived.
That's quite a big statement. Abraham Lincoln, George Washington.
I think he's amazing. I think he was sent by God. I think he's the most amazing human being ever. And he truly, truly is a patriot. I mean, he's given up his perfect life. He gave up so much to be president that he didn't have to. He lost money. He's the only president that lost money going into office, unlike these cheaters that always make money because they cheat. And he's given so much. His whole family's given so much because they love this country.
I mean, we saw just when Donald Trump made his first appearance in the hall with that, you know, conspicuous white bandage on his wounded ear, with a look on his face of a kind that I don't think we've seen before. He was deeply, genuinely moved. He seemed rather subdued. At one point, his eyes were moist with emotion. There was no great show of bravado. He seemed, I don't know, it's humble and Donald Trump. Are they the words you'd ever hear in a sentence together? But there was a certain sense of humility to what we saw there. And it's part of the tenor of this convention now and of Donald Trump himself. A couple of people just today have been telling me that Donald Trump is a changed man. And they picked up on what we're hearing, the message of the leadership is, from Donald Trump down, is that they want to be the party of unity, of uniting this so deeply divided country.
Like I said, it's about your pocketbook issues, and people need work, and people need jobs, and that's what makes our country great. And I think Trump's going to make our country great again.
Yeah. Can Donald Trump unify this country? It is so deeply divided. I mean, looked at from where I am on the other side of the Atlantic and elsewhere in the world, that seems to be the case. Donald Trump, he looks to many people like a divider, not a uniter. Can he manage that?
Listen, prosperity and greatness and restoring our country to its values should be unifying, and I believe he can do that.
I agree with that.
You also spoke to, incredibly, someone who is running for office in California, correct me if I'm wrong, John, who also was someone who on January the 6th was rioting at the Capitol. Is that right?
Yeah, that's so. I mean, the Republican candidate for California. He has, I think he's quoted as saying he would impose a dictatorship if only for a day. That's not encouraging.
Well, I think he says that in jest as a way to just rapidly clean up the country. He wouldn't do that, and I don't believe that he would. I believe that he really does follow the rules. If you were worried about him doing something like that, you would have seen it take place when he was exiting the Oval Office there in 2021. And I don't want to
relitigate old stories, but we all saw January the 6th, right? We saw...
That's okay. I was there. And I was there in support of Donald Trump and in support of them overturning clearly a corrupt election.
He was there in that crowd as they massed and mobbed the Capitol, and some of them, as we remember so vividly, smashed their way into that building. Some of them chanting the name of the Vice President Mike Pence, chanting the name of the Democrat leader of the House, Nancy Pelosi, with murder, it seemed, on their minds. And here was a besuited, softly spoken, gubernatorial Republican candidate recounting all of that as if it was all perfectly justified.
Of them overturning clearly a corrupt election. I mean, you saw...
So you accept they were trying to overturn the election?
Well, because it was fraudulent. There are too many instances of where you had very concerning things take place with the voting process. Whether you had people bringing in ballots, false statements about breaches of a water main breach, whether it was in Georgia, you had people blocking off and not allowing pollers in Philadelphia and in Detroit.
And that is a conviction despite all evidence, despite a pretty much complete and total absence of supporting evidence, is a conviction which rings through the minds of people here. The tone of that stuff, by the way, has, it seemed, from the conference stage, been rather toned down. Maybe that's what they mean by taking a tone of, I don't know, greater national harmony at this convention after what happened at the weekend. But to that I add this rider, that when people here, I think, talk about the need to reunite the country, they mean the need for Democrats, for the other lot, to unite with them. We're told that Donald Trump is going to be reaching out for unity across this country. Is he a guy who can do that? Because he's so associated with division and not unity. Can he do that and pull that off?
Okay, so the way you phrase that question, my answer to you is, but so is the other side. That you can't be any more divisive than calling Trump somebody who's going to destroy the world and he's going to be a dictator. And so, I mean, it depends on how you look at it. The other side's exactly the same. And I love how the pressure is always put on the right to do the right thing. But it's like the right thing needs to be done by all. The left side, the right side, by everybody.
An awful lot has happened at this Republican National Convention so far, and there's an awful lot yet to come, building up to the really big moment when Donald Trump formally takes to the stage and formally accepts the nomination of his party to run for president a second time on Thursday. I guess that will be cue the balloons, that'll be cue the bands and cue everything else, and it'll be on every network in the USA, it'll be seen all around the world. But, there are so many other moments that we're going to be remembering here. One of the big ones, of course, the pick and the installation of Donald Trump's choice of vice presidential running mate, which was itself a big statement about the new character, if you like, of the party and about his dominance of the Republican Party, the GOP.
This week, Josh, we had JD Vance announced as Donald Trump's vice presidential pick. What did you make of that when you saw the news?
Well, it had been coming for a while. His name had been touted for some time, and I didn't make much of his rivals in the race, people like Marco Rubio and Doug Burgum. I couldn't see Trump picking them. JD Vance is very close to Trump's son, Donald Jr., and he just felt like the guy, if you're feeling confident, and if you're feeling powerful, which I think Trump is at the moment, then JD Vance he's the darling of the MAGA base. He's an ideological choice. He's a choice, actually, if you were thinking about your legacy in 4 years' time, who might pick up the mantle of Trumpism.
Yes.
So it made sense to me. And he's been in the military and he's done a lot of work to get in Trump's good books, having obviously been very critical of him.
Senator, this is an evolution. And I know you've been asked about this before, about past comments that you've made about Donald Trump. You've said, I'm a never Trump guy, never liked him. Terrible candidate, idiot if you voted for him, might be America's Hitler, might be a cynical a-hole, cultural heroine, noxious and reprehensible.
I was wrong about Donald Trump. I didn't think he was going to be a good president, Brett. He was a great president.
From a personal perspective, I was just pleased because, then I get to talk about him. As a journalist, you always want to know the story.
So as things stand then, in July 2024, JD Vance, as you say, He's completely signed up to the Trump project and way of viewing the world in a believable, honest way, do you say?
Well, I think that question actually goes to the heart of the debate around JD Vance. Is he sincere and has he had a genuine ideological conversion to Trump? Or is it a sort of cynical, ambitious play to get power, really? I think, as ever, the real answer is somewhere in the middle. But I think people have been a bit too quick to dismiss him as just hollow and ambitious. Actually, Trumpism is very much JD Vanceism. And what I mean by that is a sort of national conservative populism, being tough on immigration, closing the borders, being isolationist and reluctant to send American troops abroad, being culturally right-wing on issues like trans and abortion. JD Vance is on board with all of that. His problem was with Trump as a person. He was very critical of Trump in 2015, 2016, 2017. So the question is, did he come round to Trump because he wanted power and he wanted Trump's blessing to become a senator and now his vice presidential nominee? Or did he come round to Trump because he radicalized and because he accepted that Trump actually was the instrument through which his own personal ideology could be implemented? So I do think it's both.
Because when we first heard of him, he was a very different kind of person. Maybe not, to your point, necessarily in terms of his core beliefs, but definitely in the way he talked about them and the kind of words he used. You met him way back when his memoir came out, Hillbilly Elegy, is that right?
Yeah, I met JD Vance in the summer of 2017, and it was a really interesting moment to meet him. So we were in Columbus, Ohio. He just moved back there from San Francisco. He'd been working as a tech investor in San Francisco, but something chafed in him against all of that. And he'd moved back to Ohio to sort of be among his people and to help the part of the country that he wanted to help. And he was sort of, something about him was sort of almost quite viscerally disgusted with the culture he found in San Francisco. And he wanted to be among his people, basically. He's quite tribal. And at the time, he was a CNN pundit. He was out there criticizing Trump. He'd had this best-selling book, and people were desperate for answers about why Trump had been elected. People in New York and Washington and Boston, liberals. And they were looking to Vance as the Trump whisperer, as the guy who understood these people that had expressed their frustration through voting for Trump.
I mean, tell us, I guess, educate us. What is it that the media, what is it that the politicians or the anti-Trump people don't get about the people who voted for Trump and continue to support him?
Well, I mean, I think one thing that they don't get is that people are consuming different types of information, right? Trump voters and Trump haters are living in really two separate media environments. And because of that, I think they're not very good at talking to each other.
But he was getting fed up with that role. And he was realizing that I think he was being sort of instrumentalized slightly by people like CNN. And he was beginning to hate them. There's quite a lot of anger in JD Vance. And he was beginning to realize he was on an ideological journey. And that journey took in converting to Catholicism. It took in becoming close to Trump himself and moving into sort of the quite sort of right-wing MAGA kind of trollish waters that he marinates in online. You know, JD Vance is a millennial like I am. I think you are too, Luke. He spends far too much time online and he follows some fairly rum characters, and that's a big part of his worldview, you know, so he does say there's quite trollish things. So, yeah, when I met him summer of 2017, he was critical of Trump, but he was starting to turn towards him, if you like.
And as you say, everyone was really interested in him because he was this Yale-educated author who had written this really touching, beautifully written memoir about a really rough, tough upbringing. Just explain what kind of a world he painted in that book that he grew up through.
Yeah, so his family are your classic Scots-Irish Appalachian family. His grandparents moved to Middletown in Ohio to go to the city to kind of get steady work, and things were looking up for the Vances, but they then sort of deteriorated somewhat. His mother was an addict. He writes in the book of her, you know, she started feeding him Pepsi when he was a baby. She once asked him to take a urine test on her behalf because she wasn't going to pass it as a young boy. You know, this is a difficult childhood. It was a violent household at times. He told me that even today he still kind of likes to sit around his underpants eating ice cream, watching television, because that's how he grew up. So he's very much from that background. And I think ultimately he was trying to move away from that and become someone else. And he ultimately decided that he didn't want to do that. He wanted to be that person who, you know, to be true to himself, I suppose, to be true to that story, that family.
And what did you make of him when you met him, seeing him in close quarters? I mean, did you get the sense of somebody obviously struggling with that? Somebody who had, a really tough and, as you say, violent working class upbringing, now lauded by the New York Times reading, CNN watching sort of liberal classes who wanted to understand why all these people were voting Trump all of a sudden. And then he was chafing against that. I mean, could you see that in him?
Yeah, he was definitely a bit conflicted about it all. He didn't quite know who he was at that time and what he really wanted. He said to me, he talked about his relationship with his wife, Usha, who's a very sort of high-powered lawyer of Indian background. And he would say, our marriage has been difficult at times because I have no capacity for conflict resolution. He said when he grew up, if you disagreed with someone, you went nuclear, and that was just how people disagreed in his household. And yeah, he was trying to work it all out. I could tell that he the way he talked about San Francisco, I think he finds kind of elite liberal culture in America quite decadent and almost quite depraved in some ways, very narcissistic and individualistic. And he was looking to come back to Columbus to generate investment into the cities and towns that he cared about. So it felt like he was moving in that direction. But he was still, at the time, he saw Trump as a real danger to America still. He described Trump as cultural heroin in the pages of the Atlantic magazines, which is, America's liberal Bible. And he was very skeptical of Trump. But I think one of the things that happened over the following 4 years was that Trump proved himself on issues that JD Vance really cares about. So Vance was able to then say, well, actually, this guy can actually deliver. He's not just bloviating clown. He's not just this kind of buffoonish reality TV star. He can actually do things. And I think that played a big part in his sort of Damascene conversion to Trump.
Yes. And there's been a lot of chatter here about what JD Vance as vice president, if he and Trump win, could mean for foreign policy. Someone was saying the other day, it's quite good for Labour because David Lammy has met JD Vance twice already. And yet, even though they may have met him, they're nervous about his views on Ukraine and the war there.
Yeah, and I think people who care very deeply about Ukraine are right to be nervous because it's clear that Trump and Vance don't necessarily agree with the level of support and backing that America under Biden has given Ukraine. And we may well see a renegotiation of that position. Vance looked to hold up Ukraine weapons funding in Congress recently. I don't think he's a Putinist or pro-Russia, as some have alleged. He's a more isolationist person, and I do think that he fought in Iraq as a Marine. He has pretty strong views about what America should and shouldn't be doing abroad. He also, like Trump, is quite anti-China. And there's a group of foreign policy hawks around them who are saying, well, China's the real threat and we're kind of wasting our time in Ukraine. And it should be the Europeans who are on the doorstep who are stepping up there. And I think Vance is very, very much in alignment with that message. If you're asking me, I don't think they would just pull the plug on the whole thing on day one, because I don't think it's that easy. But I do think there would be a realignment, which I think will be making people in Kyiv very nervous.
Mm. And, I mean, if some people question whether Donald Trump necessarily believes some of the things that he espouses and talks about, it seems like here, in your telling, that he's found a vice presidential nominee who genuinely is ideologically aligned with Trumpism. Was that the only hurdle that Trump was looking for people to clear to become his VP pick? There wasn't anything about, he'll bring voters from this areas or he'll appeal to that constituency. It was just, who is the most on board with my project?
Well, that seems to have been what swayed him in the end. But you make a very interesting point, because in 2016, he chose Mike Pence from Indiana. And that really was partly about bringing evangelicals into the fold. So picking Vance, 39 years old, only been a senator for 2 years, is an extremely confident move. And it's also a statement, this is my party now, and this is the party of Trump and the party of Trumpism, and I'll be gone at some point, but this guy is now the anointed successor. He's on my team and he believes in my policies. And as I said, Vance is close to Don Jr. He's also very close to Tucker Carlson, the very influential TV host. And they're the sort of, I like to think of them as almost a sort of engine of Trumpism now.
The Trinity.
The Trinity of Trumpism, exactly. And I think, it's what I would call a boss move.
A boss move. Well, boss move and, as you said, a confident move. And is it right that he made the choice post-assassination attempt? And do you think that plays into why it was such a confident, bold move?
Well, Vance was in the running before the assassination attempt. But clearly, things have moved in Trump's favour politically since then. I do genuinely think he feels he can't lose now. So, if he did have any lingering doubts about, do I need a more compromise candidate? Do I need to think about a woman? Clearly he's thrown all those out the window. So whatever lingering doubts he may have had, I think the assassination attempt dispelled them.
Which is funny though, Josh, thinking about all that surrounds this and this convention, are the wins really in his sails? It's looking more likely that he's going to win when you look at the polls in some of the swing states. He's survived this assassination attempt. He's got Joe Biden and all the issues that he's having to contend with. One of the big criminal cases against him, the one concerning classified documents that he kept hold of, has been dismissed. I mean, he's on a pretty extraordinary run, isn't he?
Yes. Trump has fortune is favouring the bold right now. I saw a poll today that put him 3 points ahead in Virginia, which a state he lost by, I think, about 10 points in 2020. And as you say, Biden was faltering before this and continues to falter in interviews. It's hard to see how Biden wins from this point, but, America is a strange and surprising place, and there are still months to go. But certainly on every front, Trump is ahead and surging right now. So, it's hard to see how he loses from here, but time will tell.
John, thinking about Trump's position post-assassination, you said when he came onto the stage, he seemed less full of bravado. He seemed sort of dewy-eyed and humble. Do you think that will follow through into actually how he runs the rest of this campaign, because there's still many months left of it, and how he might behave differently in office if he does win?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the obvious answer to that is I don't and can't know the answer to that. I mean, Donald Trump's demeanor seems to be very different today than it was in very recent past times. And I imagine, the speech, the big speech, will be drafted with that very much in mind. I mean, Donald Trump told us at the beginning of this week that he'd rewritten the speech that he had prepared. It's going to be more about uniting the country than it would have been about confronting his enemy and opposition. So, there'll be a reflection of what we're saying in that speech. Will it continue? Will that mood endure? Can Donald Trump change? Can a leopard change its spots? Well, my instinct of that is skeptical. I do not associate the Donald Trump that I think I know, and people here know better than me, with consensus, with reaching out, with bridging divides, and all of that sort of thing. Maybe what we're seeing now isn't a kind of new humility, and maybe it's the opposite. Maybe when Donald Trump tells us, as he has told us and told the world, that he sees it now as his God-given destiny to rule, that is not a mark of humility, that's a mark of a kind of bravado. That almost as if he's now so preordained to be the leader of this country and by extension the free world, he doesn't even have to show off about it. It's sort of his by divine right. And if you truly believe that, well, maybe you can lower your tone of voice.
John Pienaar, and you can hear John on Times Radio Drive Monday to Thursday, 4 p.m. till 7. And you'll find Josh Glancy in the Sunday Times. If you enjoyed this episode, send it along to someone who might also find it interesting. And if the both of you subscribe, you will never miss an episode when it drops into our feed. This episode was produced by Taryn Siegel, the executive producer was Kate Ford, and sound design and theme tune was by Mauro Seto. I'm Luke Jones. I'll see you soon.